Welcome to the second part of the series about the Battle of Bakhmut. I made a first episode about the developments in January, and now this one is about the developments in February and the beginning of March, because I always really like to keep some overlap. As you can see, we start on January 30th, so that we really can start when relevant developments are happening. So in this case, we will focus on the Siversk bridgehead. So you can see here in the north the Siversk city or town, and this was an interesting front sector by the end of January because the Russians attacked the Siversk bridgehead from all sides, and this put a lot of pressure on the Ukrainian forces. You can see that at least in the last episode that the 77th Airborne Brigade was sent south to really buttress the bridgehead from the south, and this has this has prevented the breakthrough of the Wagner Group because, as you remember, last episode in January, the Wagners managed to capture Soledar, and this opened up the opportunity to really move in from the valley of the Bakhmutka River north towards Siversk, and the 77th Airborne Brigade managed to hold the Wagner groups, and this was very telling for the ferocity of the fighting. The Ukrainians sent in their best forces, the airbornes, to really match the Wagners. But in the north, there was also another development because you can see in the north the 241st Brigade, which is a kind of light infantry brigade, and this brigade had a lot of effort or difficulty actually to hold the line on the north end. So there was the 81st Airborne Brigade which came in as a reinforcement, and the 241st was moved out. So you can see that this Siversk bridgehead was being buttressed by two airborne brigades, and not only that, the 54th Mechanized Brigade was also moved in to buttress their front line. So again, two airborne brigades, one mechanized brigade to keep the Siversk bridgehead, and I think that's also to keep Russian forces tied down so that they will not have the full capacity to attack Bakhmut, to focus on Bakhmut, because there's always this threat of the Siversk bridgehead. So I think that's the reasoning behind keeping this bridgehead, despite the fact that it's more easy to shorten the front lines and move behind the Bakhmutka River. I think it's also partly because in the north there's this forest, which you can see just on the north of the map, where there are Ukrainian forces, and if the Russians would control the south bank of the river, they could also at least target these forces in the north of these of the Donetsk, Severodonetsk River. So this is all the more reason to keep the Siversk bridgehead. So let's go to Bakhmut city, which is in the south. It's highlighting in arc. And there you could see by the end of January that the Wagners were attacking the urban area. So you have the Wagners and they are attacking the urban area. And the 93rd Brigade was being sent to the front. So you can see the 93rd is near Slavyansk Kramatorsk. So now it's highlighting and it will be moved to the front line. Again, sorry about the covering of the 63rd Mechanized Brigade, but in all there are like 7 mechanized brigades in this vicinity. So plus the 3 airborne brigades is 10 at least brigades which are which are good forces which are in this area. I get also some criticism from people saying like those boxes do not always represent the full strength. Not all brigades are on full strength. So to really address this criticism, this is what we are working with. I think it gives us some insight about the movements and how things are developing. It doesn't say everything because it can happen that brigades are severely under strength and there are brigades which are up to strength. it's not always a representation of strength. And it also can happen that a brigade is full strength, but for example not experienced or well trained. And sometimes you have brigades which are not full strength, but they're actually very experienced and they're very well trained, and they have good equipment. So it doesn't always represent strength, but at least you get an impression, and that's what I would like to work with these icons to really highlight some of the developments as I see them unfolding. Because again, as we know from other conflicts, it can take decades or even centuries before things are being uh, clear up in terms of what actually happened on the battlefield when archives open, when veterans start to talk. So for the moment, we just have to work with this as it is. So on January 31st, there are two brigades on the west of Bakhmut, the 111th and the 125th. They actually kind of disappeared. Why? I don't know, but they're no longer on the map. So I usually use the military land map, and I used several maps which are publicly available, like the live UA map and the map of the deep state. So, and I use a mixture of these maps to see the developments of the front line, what happens, and where the units are located. Most units which can be located are Ukrainian. For the Russians, it's a little bit more difficult to determine which units are on the front line, but we should really think that most of the fighting around Bakhmut is done by the Wagners. And I made those boxes a little bit smaller because I think that Wagners are usually deployed as battalions. Again, I might be wrong, but that's my feeling. So, and for the moment, we only can guess. And I think that on both sides of Bakhmut, so on the north side and on the south side, there's the equivalent of one regiment. It could be 3 battalions, 4 battalions, but at least that's what I think in regards to the strength of the Wagner forces. And in terms of Ukrainian reinforcements, I should say that this day it appears that the 116th Brigade arrived, and it was being positioned again near the Siversk bridgehead to buttress the Siversk bridgehead from that direction, because you can see near Soledar that the front line crosses the Bakhmutka river. So that's the Blahodatne bridgehead, which is being created by the Wagner Group by the end of January. It's a mystery to me why, despite all those boxes, all those units of the Ukrainian army, this bridgehead was not quelled, was not being pushed back over the river. This is a kind of very bad situation, and we can see this. We will see this situation unfold this month in February, and the fact that a brigade was placed on the road to Siversk shows that the Ukrainians were well aware of the danger which would come from this bridgehead, whether the Wagners would go straight forward or go north or go south. At this stage of the battle, we don't know. So let's go to, yeah, this is 116th again, to the 2nd of February. So in the 2nd of February, the Wagners, they attack on the south. So you can see here, there's the box highlighting, and they attacked south near Chasiv Yar, which is very well known nowadays. So there, Chasiv Yar is a settlement with a lot of forest around it. It's it's just north of the road, which you can see, where the 60th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainians is located, and it's a very good area to defend due to the mixture of urban area and forests. And there's also an attack towards the main supply line from the west. So the 60th Brigade up. They move. They move. The 60th Brigade moved to the place near Chasiv Yar, and you can see the 63rd, which was obscured by the arrival of the 93rd, moves in to buttress the line in the south. So now there are like three mechanized brigades to really counter the Wagner Group, and this will come into play later on, as we shall see. So the 63rd is there. But interestingly enough, the 46th Airborne Brigade, which you can see in the north, which was involved in the Battle of Soledar, or actually kind of the aftermath of the Battle of Soledar. It came kind of late in the battle. They were moved out. Why they were moved out is a question mark. Probably strength preservation. They must have taken some losses. Apparently, the Ukrainians were confident enough that they could hold the Blagodatne bridgehead with the forces at hand, and they moved their airborne brigade out. So another brigade which moved out was the 63rd Brigade, which is also located over there near the Blagodatne bridgehead. So I think it's really a matter of exhaustion of these units. Otherwise, I cannot imagine why you would move out forces while the Russians have this bridgehead and are developing, are really pushing. So again, probably those units were exhausted. But there were two light brigades being brought in. So in the same sector, so the 113th and the 119th, and these were light infantry units. Why these units were chosen, I don't know, but at least they will give they will give some infantry reinforcements, so to really make at least a defensive line. The 119th is not put in the front line right away, but kind of on the hills around Bakhmut, and the 113th is being put in the line near Blagodatne. So apparently the Ukrainians did want to reinforce this line in front of the bridgehead, but they choose to move out the other forces, which were actually on paper better, but probably they were exhausted. So I made a small remark saying high grade troops are being replaced by low grade troops. So that's the situation on February 2nd. In the Siversk bridgehead, you have the Wagner attack near the Bakhmutka river. So you can see here the arrow is flashing. And there was this kind of small progress. Voila. You can see the front line has pushed a little bit. And you had this Sacco and Vanzetti settlement, which is named after two Italian anarchists, which is quite ironic. At first I was thinking it's a kind of Italian fashion brand, but no, they were two Italian anarchists. So the Ukrainians apparently have evacuated the lowland on the east bank of the Bakhmutka river, and this river bend. But nevertheless, that's the last success of the Wagners in this sector. So we go to February 5th. Again, we jump always a little bit to really don't exhaust with small details, but have the bigger picture and to really focus on major developments in the front line. So February 5th, again, the Siversk bridgehead, the end of the Siversk bridgehead offensive, which started on January 20th. So, and by January 25th, there was this all-out attack. So after 2 weeks, so on February 5th, this attack has petered out. And one of the interesting developments is that the 241st Brigade was also being pulled out from this sector and moved to Bakhmut. So that's really quite interesting to Blagodatne bridgehead area. So apparently the Ukrainians were also well aware that the Siversk offensive of the Russians at least has petered out. And the 31st VDV Brigade moved in that sector. Oh, wait a moment. This brigade doesn't appear. Sorry, there was something wrong with my presentation. But nevertheless, that brigade normally would have been moved in. So the Wagners moved out. So the Wagners, they move out of this sector of the 77th Airborne Brigade, and the Russians bring in their own airborne troops, which are not visible due to a small error in my mapping. But again, just imagine they are there. So the Wagners, they pull back from the push to Siversk and start to focus on the Blau-Datny bridgehead, which was already there for several days. And again, the Ukrainians, they apparently didn't manage to destroy this bridgehead despite the danger it poses, and this danger is going to be very evident from now on. So on the south, there's this pincer from the Wagners, which is already over the Bakhmutka river. Because Bakhmut, yes, you have here the Wagner Group in the south and the Wagner Group in the north, and they're going to make a pincer. Here, the red arrows I always indicate plans with red arrows, so what forces are planning to do, but this is not the actual reality yet. So at least we know the direction of the attack of the Russians by then. At least this is an obvious course of action. And there's this push to the south from the what to the because you had on the east side of the Bakhmutka River the Krasna Hora bridgehead. That's a kind of small settlement which I didn't put in, but just it's just south of the Solidar of the front line at Solidar. And there's this attack. So again, so you have the attack from outside of the Blau-Datny bridgehead, and also an attack from the Wagner forces there on the east side of the river to really cut off this bridgehead from the Ukrainians. Otherwise, there will always be a kind of like a thorn in the side of this Blau-Datny bridgehead. So, and there's a renewed effort to go from the south. So they really try to push both from the east side into the urban area, and they try to go directly to the south from the Blau-Datny, and also from the south of Bakhmut inside of the city. They really try to crush it in a direct assault, and they try to attack Chasiv region. So to cut this road on the south going into Bakhmut, it's a major road. As you can see, there are two major roads which I've put in. One from Slavyansk going to the south to Bakhmut. That one is still quite secure. That stage of the battle, at least the Ukrainians can move their forces from that road. And you have the one from Trushkivka, go to south and then go to east into Bakhmut, and that road actually is already in danger. And then there are also roads in between, so between those two major roads, which are more kind of like country roads, which are not always paved. So that's why I didn't put them in. So the Ukrainians still have ample of roads to reinforce Bakhmut, but the writing is kind of on the wall, meaning that the Russians are really going to do the effort to try to take Bakhmut with their best forces, the Wagner forces, and we'll see how that unfolds by going to February 8th. So by February 8th, the 241st moved into the Bakhmut, and in Bakhmut you can see 5 boxes. And that's also kind of deceiving. I mean, on the military land map, there are always 5 boxes until very late in February. And I don't know how much strength they represent. But I would guess that they put a lot of troops into Bakhmut in any case, because that's their kind of strategy, which they also did in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, meaning that they try to draw the Russian forces into the urban areas and try to use the urban areas to really drain the Russians of manpower. So I would guess that this is a kind of logical. Um, this is kind of logical that they have a lot of forces, or at least a lot of infantry, in the build-up area to really anticipate a Russian attack into the build-up area. That net, just like Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, that that the Russians would focus on urban combat, and that the Ukrainians can use their experience but also their advantage as being defender in urban combat to really incur heavy losses on the Russian forces. So, but what the Wagners do, I mean, of course, they keep pressure on Bakhmut itself, as you can see by the arrows in several directions. But what they also do, and that's now very clear on February 8th, is that they're going to break out. So you can see here the Wagner forces broke out of the bridgehead at Blaudatny, and this was really quite spectacular because what happened is that the bridgehead was not only expanded significantly, but the Wagners also attacked uphill. And it was even rumored that they encountered forces of the Ukrainians with no ammunition. I mean, this war is full of rumors from both sides, but it is an interesting fact that the Ukrainians didn't manage to hold the high ground. Well, actually, they have this. They have several days to dig in, to prepare. They knew the Wagners were coming. They already had this bridgehead, the Wagners, so it was a matter of time before they would try to break out. But they managed to break out, and especially the 113th Brigade had to pull back. And what happened is that now the Ukrainians have on both sides of this bulge, this expanded bridgehead, two tank brigades. And again, those two tank brigades, I don't know what they are doing. I mean, there was some footage of a tank firing at the Wagners, but I think, but that's just my guess, is that those tank brigades don't contain too much tanks anymore, and that are purely put into the line of their infantry element, and that they don't have the power anymore to really conduct a counterattack, to really quell this bridgehead, this advance. So they're just a pure holding force. Otherwise, I don't have any um, idea why they would be there and why they don't attack to uh, to attack the exposed Wagner forces. So two brigades could not stop the attack. I've noted back then, and there's another brigade coming in as a reinforcement. See the two tank brigades on both sides of the bulge, and then you have a mechanized brigade which being pulled in as a reinforcement. So apparently the Ukrainians thought those existing forces were not enough to contain the Wagners, and they pulled in another mechanized brigade which was put on the road to Slavyansk, because you could imagine that the Wagners maybe would try to push towards Slavyansk to cut the road, not only cut the road but also to um, to capitalize on their breakout, because that's what it is. And now the question is, like, where will they go? Like, would they go south? So again, the 30th Mechanized Brigade. So sorry. So the next thing which happened is that the Wagners also in the south managed to move closer to the road. So there was this big battle of Chasiv Yar. These three mechanized brigades of the Ukrainians, they had to fight very hard to the Wagner advance, to stem the Wagner advance. Basically, the road to Bakhmut became the de facto battle line, the line of contact, and the Wagners tried to break in to Chasiv Yar, the forest, and Ivanovska, which is kind of like near Bakhmut, where the 63rd Brigade is located. I didn't want to make this map too busy with too many lines and too many settlements. So again, try to imagine that these places are there, but I would like to keep the overview a little bit. So it was very difficult for the Wagners to break through, but the road there should consider to be useless now by now, because the Wagner really can fire at point blank range to any traffic which will go over the road in the south, going to the south of Bakhmut. But meanwhile, you can see that on the 12th of February, there's this attack on the east bank of the Bakhmutka River. So the Wagner forces go south from their little bridgehead to the Bakhmutka River Valley to really try to make sure that this thorn at Krasna Hora is being eliminated. So you can see here the front line moves. So again, to make sure that you notice the change, the Ukrainians are being driven out of the east bank of the Bakhmutka River, and they're now confined to the urban area. So this will make sure that the Russians, the Blagodatne bridgehead cannot be cut off, or at least there's no direct fire from the east bank. So apparently the Russians deemed this necessary to continue their operations, so they really focused on this. And then on February 15th, something happened which really quite surprised me, but it's really indicative of the spirit of these mechanized forces of Ukraine, that they went into the counterattack against the Wagner forces. So the 60th Brigade, most likely, they really attacked, and this was widely reported, and this compelled the Wagners to retreat. So their attack in the south kind of petered out. That's what I noted down back then. Like the Ukrainians felt it was opportune to go into the counterattack, and the Wagners, they were taken aback, and they managed to they decided even to pull back. So this road to Bakhmut seemed to kind of like being liberated. The battle for Chasiv Yar and Ivanovka seemed to be decided in favor of the Ukrainians for now, and the Wagners, they had to pull back and lick their wounds. So this was a kind of local success of the Ukrainian army, but this was in hindsight quite temporarily. On the 18th of February, the Wagner breaks into Ukrainian lines north of Bakhmut at a place called Paraskovievka, and they really focused on the road to Bakhmut. So again, they really attacked in strength and managed to move the front line to the high road. So this road becomes totally unusable. They already had reached it due to their breakout at February 8th, but now February 18th, they are along the whole line of this road from Slavyansk to Bakhmut. They managed to drive the Ukrainians away, and this was probably quite significant, because you can see that on February 20th they're going to attack more. They're going to keep attacking in this sector. So in the south you can see the Ukrainians managed to block off and even push back the Wagners, but in the north the Wagners, they really are on the move. But on February 20th there was also this declaration of Zelensky that that Bakhmut will not be defended at any cost. So apparently he already felt that Bakhmut was in danger. So this was really quite telling, because in the beginning of the month he said that Bakhmut will be defended in force, and now he declared that Bakhmut will not be defended at any cost. So the Wagners, they attacked from the north, to the north. Basically, that's an interesting development. So again, I would like to also highlight the things which didn't went well, because what happened is that the Ukrainian 17th Armored Brigade was moved to the north, because the Ukrainians, they really value their Siversk bridgehead, so they moved this tank brigade to the north to blunt this Wagner attack. So you can see that in February the Wagners, they tried to attack through the Bakhmutka river valley to Siversk in the beginning of the month on the east bank, and near the 20th of February to the west bank of the river. But this was blocked by the Ukrainians. They really put forces to make sure that the Wagners could not have any success. So the interesting part about February 20th is that the 93rd Mechanized Brigade moved into Bakhmut itself, into the garrison, and this left only the 119th Brigade, at least on paper, in this sector. So the Wagners, they pushed until the main highway, and this was being defended by this kind of light infantry, which really quite puzzling, because as you can see on the map, the Ukrainians have most units on the north part of the bulge, the bridgehead, the Blaudatne bridgehead. So you have these two tank brigades, and you have a territorial brigade and a mechanized brigade, and in the south, where you would expect the Russians to attack, to really try to encircle Bakhmut, there's only one brigade, at least on paper right now, what we could see. So so again, I've put this 119th a little bit closer, so that's clear that this is a unit which is holding the front line in this sector. So on February 23rd, we have the 60th and the 63rd Mechanized Brigades. They retreat to the rear, so they're being moved away. At least they disappear from the front line in this sector, and which is really quite telling. So apparently they're kind of exhausted. I mean, the 63rd and the 60th have been holding the Wagners back and even counter-attacking, but this has apparently exhausted their forces. And the 127th is being pulled in this sector to hold the line. So again, on both sides of Bakhmut, both in the north sector and the south sector, they put this kind of light troops. So you really ask yourself, like, is there no other troops to hold the line? What are the Ukrainians thinking, that the Russians are going to just leave it be? At least I would be enticed, as being the Russians, to attack these light troops, because the Ukrainians basically moved out their best troops. But we will see that there will be reinforcements later. So, because on the same day you had the 14th and Mechanized Brigade and the 57th Motorized Brigade. Wait a moment. So the 127th is being highlighted, and then you have this 14th and the 57th Motorized Brigade coming in, but not being put in the front line. They really put a little bit back. So actually near the last supply lines, which are still available, which are not under Russian fire yet. So they're being put in reserve near Bakhmut for any to anticipate any Russian breakthrough, apparently. So, but what I would think is that the Ukrainians put light troops in the front line to hold it, and then they have this kind of mechanized and motorized forces to really anticipate the Russian, whether it comes from the south or the north, the attack. So we will see. So the Wagners, on the same day, the 23rd, they attack over the M3 highway in the north of Bakhmut, and they push the 119th Brigade back. This was really quite a major attack back then. and you can see those brigades are again being highlighted as reserves, so they don't really come into play despite being moved in. So we'll see how this unfolds. So on the 24th of February, the Wagner Group's attack in the northern urban area, the northern tip of Bakhmut, and they take Yahitne, which is actually the most northern tip of the Bakhmut agglomeration. So the Wagners, they're really they take a kind of debate and go into the city, the urban area. So I moved the box lower so that you can see what it looks like. So the Russians have crossed the highway, and you can see how the encirclement is going to take shape in this on the 24th of February. So then we go to the 26th of February. The 28th Mechanized Brigade is being withdrawn to the south. So this unit is apparently exhausted as well, to a more quiet sector. So this unit apparently still has some strength, but it's really quite telling that it's being pulled out. There are several battalions of Ukrainian infantry will take the line in exchange, but I've not drawn them in because I would like to keep a kind of the high level view of developments. And the 56th Motorized Brigade is coming in. So what we can see is that there are like two motorized brigades and one mechanized brigade being put in right where on the the supply roads to Bakhmut, but those units don't really come into action yet. So the Wagners, they keep attacking, going to the south. Wait a moment. Okay, so you have the box of the Wagners, they're going attacking from the south. So you can see that the Wagners, they don't longer focus on Chasiv Yar, where the 127th is located, but are really focused on going into the urban area south of Bakhmut, but not too much near the Bakhmutka river, but a little bit away. So you have this kind of, yeah, the southwest part of Bakhmut, where the road comes into Bakhmut, the supply road, and they attack over there to cut it off, obviously. And again, the Ukrainians don't send in any troops, at least not on a large scale, to block these attacks. So we're going to February 28th. The Wagner is going to attack, and that's really quite telling. So what we would expect is that the Wagners, because they're attacking from the south into the urban area, and they have been focusing on Yahitne in the north, going into the urban area of Bakhmut, but then suddenly they attack on the 28th of February to the east. So that these two arrows, they go to the east. So they still have this kind of hope to go to Kramatorsk-Slaviansk. At least that's the idea, perhaps, but we don't know. At least they attack in that sector, and that's why the Ukrainians put a lot of units to really prevent this kind of breakout, so that the units in Bakhmut are not being put into a bigger pincer movement. And then we can see some interesting development, because the 119th Brigade is being put into line to plug the gaps. So that's really quite telling. And the news, the front line actually near Bakhmut. So we will see what will happen. So on March 2nd, the 119th Brigade is being pulled out. So that after 3 days of hard fighting, because the Wagners have been pushing to the east, so this 119th is being pulled out. And apparently I think it's because of losses. They have been in the line, they have been bearing the full brunt of the Wagner attack going to the east. And now it's time for the 56th Brigade to hold the line. So the Ukrainians are very keen on keeping the Russians near in Bakhmut, but not letting them take the opportunity to break out to the east. That's something which they definitely don't want to happen. So, and the 67th Mechanized Brigade is being pulled in. So again, also to stem the tide of the Wagners going to the east. So now there are like two motorized brigades and two mechanized brigades being pulled in as reinforcements. But basically, there are more there to make sure the Russians don't break out. So use the opportunity to really close the ring about Bakhmut and really go into pursuit. They really want to, because that's what we saw in Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, that the Russians they moved in from the south and tried to really exploit this breakthrough, and now they try to really make this retreat from Bakhmut, I think, as organized as possible by putting forces there to really prevent a rout, to really prevent the Russians from taking the opportunity to go all the way to Kramatorsk-Slaviansk. So they're really preparing again this line, at least to keep the high grounds for now and to really bolster the defensive line. So what I see in March is that the Russians are not going to break out like that, because at least in Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, you saw that the Russians were coming in from the south. The Ukrainian retreat really didn't went so well. They managed to pull out, but in drips and drabs, and the Russians almost managed to take Siversk by storm. At least they tried to do it and they failed. But still, I think the Ukrainians wanted to prevent this scenario from happening again. That the Russians can use this opportunity to really try to turn the Ukrainian retreat from Bakhmut into a rout, and they really block all the Russian attempts to really go east. So what happened is that the 67th went there to block the line, but on March 2nd, the Wagners broke out to the south, and this attack again, you can see this one managed to reach at least the last supply line of the Ukrainian army came into sight, into visual. The Wagners managed to really see this road and put fire on this road. So now this road is also kind of under fire control, and the Wagners they declared Bakhmut as encircled, in operational encirclement, as they say it, meaning that all roads going in to Bakhmut are under their fire control, meaning that they can fire at will. And what happened on March 3rd is really quite telling. So again, this arrow is really quite significant. This was really the final push, which put Bakhmut in operational encirclement. Again, you can see the 5 boxes in Bakhmut. I assume, but I don't know, that the Ukrainians pulled out a lot of units already from the 20th of February when Zelensky announced that he would not defend Bakhmut at any cost. So I think for at least 2 weeks, or for 2 weeks, something like that, the Ukrainians have been pulling out material and troops already. So those 5 boxes are, in my opinion, not representative of the actual situation. The number of Ukrainian troops must be between 2 and 5,000. I mean, they need to have a sizable force to keep the front line, but I think they moved out a lot of forces because there used to be, I think, something like 10 to 15,000. So they managed to pull out the bulk of these forces already. But still, there are significant forces still in. So again, those forces has been moved out. Voila. And I don't know, because for now you can see on March 2nd, I think there are like 2,000 to maximum 5,000 troops left in Bakhmut. And what happened is that on March, the next day, is that bridges were blown up. So this is usually a general sign of retreat. And even one bridge was being blown up, which was not supposed to be blown up. That was the last road in and out of Bakhmut, which was under fire and control of the Russians. But nevertheless, it's not clear whether the Ukrainians blow it up or the Russians. They aimed to blow it up with a rocket or some artillery systems. But at least at this stage, we can see that the Bakhmut is going to fall in the coming weeks. The clearing out of the city is a matter of time, but I don't think the Ukrainians can undo the Russian advance for now. I mean, there are a lot of, you can see there's a lot of icons of the Ukrainian army east of Bakhmut. No, sorry, west of Bakhmut. But so far, you could see in February that there were generally a lot of boxes in the west of Bakhmut, but the counterattacks were quite limited. I mean, the southern counterattack was successful, local counterattack, but I didn't see a lot of counterattacks. And maybe there will be something, a pushback, but for now, I really cannot see it happen. So this is my retrospective of the Battle of Bakhmut in February. So let's have a look next month how things unfold in March. I mean, there's still a lot of things going on. Again, there are a lot of boxes, a lot of Ukrainian units, at least on paper, on the west of Bakhmut. And it remains to be seen what Wagner forces still can pull off, because at this stage they might be quite exhausted, at least physically exhausted, but also in terms of manpower they must have taken quite some toll, because they have taken the brunt of the attack. So they also need to replenish their ranks. They have to take a rest and refit. Their equipment must be replenished as well, and their ammunitions. But so far, the most interesting part is that despite the fact that Ukrainians had ample mechanized forces, this didn't play a big role in the overall fighting. Again, there was this counter push in the south, which went well for the Ukrainians, but otherwise those mechanized forces didn't make a big impression. On the other hand, the Wagner Group is mostly infantry, and they pulled off quite some interesting feats, like storming the hills near Blaudatne to break out of the bridgehead. And again, they of course they have their vehicles, but basically it's mostly infantry. So this battle is again about artillery, and at some stage the Wagner Group also signaled that they don't had enough artillery support. This is really quite essential for their success. But again, it's a kind of mixture between artillery and mostly light infantry, I would say, and mechanized forces. They play a supporting role, which is quite interesting and necessary, but it's basically an infantry and artillery battle. So we'll see, and I hope you'll be there with me for the next episode. So please give thumbs up, put your comments in the comment section to really tell me what you think about this video, how I could improve, what you liked, what you didn't like, and don't forget to subscribe to catch up with the next video.